When politicians in Washington start attacking tariffs on India and in the same breath warn about presidential abuse of emergency powers, something bigger than trade is on the table. 3 members of the U.S. House of Representatives have just introduced a resolution to end Donald Trump's national emergency that imposed tariffs of up to 50% on Indian imports. They are not just complaining about prices, they are trying to shut off the legal pipeline that allowed one man to rewrite the rules of India. U.S. trade with a stroke of a pen. And they picked this timing on purpose, just as the Supreme Court is weighing whether that emergency power was stretched so far that half of Trump's tariff arsenal may be unconstitutional. Step back and look at how we got here. Trump didn't wake up one morning and slap 50% tariffs on India in one move. This has been a staircase. First came reciprocal duties to match what he called unfair foreign tariffs. Then, on August 27, 2025, the administration added a second layer, an extra 25% secondary duty on many Indian origin products on top of earlier reciprocal tariffs. According to House sponsors Deborah Ross, Mark Vasey, and Raja Krishnamurthy, that combination pushed effective tariffs on key Indian imports as high as 50% using the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEPA, as the legal engine. That law was written for real external crises, sanctions, terrorism, sudden threats. Critics say it's now being used as a permanent shortcut for trade wars. The new House resolution goes directly at that emergency declaration. It says, in the national emergency Trump invoked to raise tariffs on India, rescind the extra 25% layer and put a leash on how far a president can go using IEPA to jack up import duties without Congress voting. It follows a bipartisan Senate move to end similar emergency-based tariffs on Brazil and signal that both parties are nervous about letting any president run a quasi-global tariff regime on autopilot. The sponsors argue that 50% duties have hurt small businesses and consumers in both countries, disrupted supply chains, and strained a strategic partnership that should be focused on China, not fighting over basmati rice and pharmaceuticals. In their view, ending the emergency is the first step toward resetting India's trade on a more normal negotiated path. The White House counters with a simple headline: tariffs are working. Officials in friendly media point out that the U.S. trade deficit has narrowed to a 5-year low and that October's trade gap was more than 40-50% smaller than the same month a year earlier. They credit Trump's reciprocal tariff strategy and Buy American push for the shift, noting that imports have fallen and exports in certain categories have grown. They frame the 50% tariffs on countries like India not as punishment but as leverage, a way to force more balanced deals, local investment, and respect for us intellectual property. From that angle, moves by Congress to tear down tariff walls look like sabotage of a rare success, a shrinking trade gap in a world where most countries still run surpluses against America. But this isn't just a tug-of-war between Capitol Hill and the White House. Over on First Street, the Supreme Court is holding the detonator. Multiple lawsuits have challenged Trump's use of IEPA to impose broad reciprocal and deficit-driven tariffs on a range of partners, arguing that Congress never authorized this kind of open-ended tax power. 3 lower court decisions have already raised serious doubts, with judges calling some of these moves an abuse of emergency authority. The Supreme Court heard arguments in November, and analysts say key justices signaled skepticism about giving any president what amounts to a blank check over tariffs whenever they declare an economic emergency. If the court rules against Trump, the impact would go far beyond India. Roughly half of his current tariffs, those built on IEPA rather than older trade statutes, could be invalidated or sharply curtailed. Effective tariff rates would fall. Many importers could claim refunds on duties already paid, and the administration would have to fall back on narrower tools that require more specific findings. That would weaken the leverage Trump says he used to settle 8 wars with tariffs and force Congress to decide whether to replace those powers with a more explicit legal framework. If the court upholds the tariffs, by contrast, it would cement a model in which future presidents can invoke EEPA to reshape trade flows with limited oversight. Exactly what House sponsors are now trying to prevent through their resolution. India sits in the middle of this collision. For Indian exporters in textiles, leather goods, engineering products, and specialty chemicals, a 50% U.S. tariff is not a modest nuisance. It's a potential kill shot. Margins evaporate, contracts shift to other suppliers, and strategic planning becomes nearly impossible. Indian commentators note that these tariffs landed even as New Delhi was positioning itself as a friendshoring alternative to China. On the American side, retailers and manufacturers that rely on Indian inputs complain about higher costs and longer lead times. That's why parts of us industry quietly support the House resolution and cheer the Supreme Court challenge. They see overbroad tariffs as another layer of inflation and uncertainty in an environment already full of both. So what does a cautious investor do in this mess? First, assume volatility around India links sectors and import-heavy U.S. businesses until the court rules and Congress votes. If both the resolution and a negative Supreme Court decision hit, you could see a sharp short-term rally in names beaten down by tariffs, as well as a pop in Indian exporters that suddenly regain access on better terms. Second, understand that even if these specific tariffs fall, the political appetite for using trade as leverage is not going away. Future administrations may try again with new laws, narrower emergencies, or sectoral duties that pass legal muster. The long-term winners will be businesses that can flex supply chains between India, other Asia, and domestic production without betting everything on one tariff schedule. In the end, this isn't just about 50% tariffs on India. It's about whether trade rules are set by laws and negotiated agreements or improvised via emergency powers and then cleaned up later by courts and resolutions. For India, the outcome will signal how stable this policy really is toward its strategic partner. For American households, it will show whether Washington is more interested in boasting about trade gaps or in building a predictable framework that keeps prices and supply chains under control. For investors, it's a live case study in why you never assume this year's tariff map will look the same 5 years from now.